Assalamu alaikum students. Today I am going to discuss Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. As you know that this novel Metamorphosis is based on the theory of existentialism, and I hope that you have read this novel in your previous semester. But here we are studying this novel under the domain of word literature in translation. So, I'm going to analyze this novel in comparison with other words literature. As many of you know that this novel Metamorphosis has been written in German language, and it is very famous novel that belongs to German literature. As far as the history of German literature is concerned, German literature has very influential history, so that it is the most significant domain of world literature. And you will be surprised to know that the main concept and the journal ideology of world literature actually came from German literature. And in 21st century, Germany has been an important country for the development of contemporary analytical philosophy in continental Europe. That is why historically Germany has been called the country of poets and thinkers. And according to a global opinion poll of BBC, Germany was not only the second most respected nation among 50 countries in 2003, but also it is recognized for having most positive influence in the world in 2011, 2013, and in 2014. Germany is a well-known country for its cultural celebrations, and culture of Germany has shaped by major intellectuals and popular currents in Europe, both religious and secular. The culture of Germany basically includes its philosophy, music, literature, cinema, language, art, architecture, design, sports, and religion. So, the rise of this modern natural sciences and the related decline of religious raised a series of questions which reoccurred throughout German philosophy concerning the relationships between knowledge and faith, reason and emotion, scientific, ethical, and above all, the artistic way of seeing the world. Students, in this slide, I'm going to discuss the contribution of German scholars and philosophers which make German literature most influential in world literature. There are many significant movements of German literature that comprising the significant work of German authors. And when literature started writing in German language, that was the era of 17th century, and a Frankish noble family founded by Charles Martin, that was Carolingian dynasty. And the old High German period is reckoned to run until about mid 11th century. The famous work of 17th century is Hildebrand Slade, and heroic epic was Heliant. So before Baroque period, in 12th century, in the key work that include the Ring is famous in that era. While in Baroque period, 1600 to 1720 was one of the most fertile times in German literature when a lot of work has been produced. While the modern literature in German begins with the author of the Enlightenment, that is herder, while the sensibility movement of 1950s and 1770s, it ended with Goethe's best-selling that was in 1774 that named with Die Junger Wolde. But you don't need to memorize the names uh, in German language. I'm just discussing the contribution of literature um, in that German language so that you can very well understand the influence or the productivity of work uh, in German language, in German literature. Students, this slide is a continuation of previous slide, and here I just want to tell you the contribution of German philosophers in literature, that how during Middle Ages German philosophers have helped in shaping Western philosophy, and a number of German intellectuals were also influential in sociology. Uh, so, in 17th century, Kant played a central role in the history of philosophy, and Kantianism inspired the work of Nietzsche. German idealism, defended by Fichte and Hegel, and Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, developed communist theory in the second half of 19th century. So you see how German scholars and philosophers have contributed and persuaded the tradition of German philosophy in uh, throughout the years and in 20th century as well. So a number of German intellectuals were also influential in sociology. They work for society, and that society also consider their work. Students, as I have discussed earlier, that there are many significant movements, many significant philosophies that have emerged in German literature. For example, the epic theater, the Holocaust, the faith theater, and Strum and Drang philosophy. And here I'm going to discuss Strum and Drang philosophy. The exact pronunciation is Strum und Drang philosophy. Fine. And the literal meaning is that storm and drive, but usually it is translated as storm and stress. Students, you all know that English romantic movement is inspired by French Revolution, but actually the romantic movement is actually inspired by German philosophy, Strum and Drang philosophy. And basically, it is a proto-romantic movement in German literature and music that occurred between late 1760s and early 1780s. The main focus of this movement were on individual subjectivity. In particular, extremes of emotion were given free expression. And that is the reason that the famous poet S.T. Coleridge is one of among many poets who were actually inspired by German philosophy and German idealism, because this is the first effort to find man and nature relation in philosophical way, and its exalted nature and human individualism, and sought to overthrow the Enlightenment cult of rationalism. To understand this idea, basically, it is the reaction to the perceived constraints of rationalism imposed by that movement that I have discussed before, the Enlightenment and associated aesthetic movement. And this period is named for Friedrich Maximilian Kingler's play of the same name, like Strammen and Drang. This is the same name that is performed in form of a play in 1760. 1777. And basically, that works containing rousing action and high emotionalism that often deal with the individual's revolt against society. Basically, if we see the characteristics of this philosophy, Strum and Drang philosophy, then we can see that the protagonist is driven to action that is often a violent action, but not by the pursuit of noble means and nor by the true motive, but by the revenge and greed. So the significant and the main important writer is Goethe and Schiller, who began their career as prominent member of the movement. And Goethe exemplifies with common ambiguity and outburst of irrationality. Students, I hope that you have completely understand Strum and Drang philosophy. And here I'm going to give you a self assignment to explore the influence of Strum and Drang philosophy on metamorphosis. Here I'm going to discuss a very important and interesting German aspect, that is expressionist literature, which seeks to reproduce not objective reality but the subjective reality which people, object, and event arouse in us. Subjectivity, as you know, is very much related with our own feelings, our own emotions, and our own opinion, and it is also very much related with the Strum and Drang philosophy. So, expressionist literature depicts a psychological and spiritual reality through distortion and exaggeration of situation. And it also presents the distorted and exaggerated situation as if it were completely real. So, expressionist literature emphasizes the visionary experience, pierces the surface of things to reveal essence. Uh, how that the inward situation is very much related with the outward situation. For example, if we are sad and there is raining outside, then we used to relate our sadness with that rain by interpreting that the clouds are also weeping with us. For it is just an example that how we we used to relate our visionary experience, and it how it pierces the surface of things to reveal the essence. And expressionist literature also explores how to transcend the material world, and it also replaces concrete particulars with allegorical forms. In this slide, I'm going to discuss the personal life of Franz Kafka. Like Franz Kafka, who was born in Prague, the capital of Kingdom of Bohemia, and used to speak that German Bohemian language. But student, here I want to tell you the geography of Prague, like being part of German Austro-Hungarian Empire, that we used to call the capital of Czech Republic, and they segregated its Jewish population into German-speaking ghetto, and it is founded on the seven hills and dominated by the castle, looming high over the city as a symbol of authority. And the very interesting thing is that it is highly dense city with narrow labyrinth-like streets, and that is associated with the tradition of magic and mysticism. When Students, I want to relate that geography of Prague, having the castle, having the labyrinth-like streets, and highly dense city with narrow streets, and the tradition of magic and mysticism with the personality of Franz Kafka. That Franz Kafka is a person that people found Kafka a suspicious person who is physically and mentally repulsive. Although Kafka is a person who enjoyed sharing jokes with his friends and helped them in difficult situations with good advice. So apparently, the things or the things which which reveal the personality of a character are different, and actually the personality is different, like the internal and external aspect. Same is the case with the city of Prague, being a very interesting and highly dense city, and the beautiful city having seven hills that were dominated by the castle, but the labyrinth like streets, which increases the mysticism and the magic in that place. Same is the case with the personality of Franz Kafka. As far as his personal life is concerned, he belonged to middle class family, and his relationship with his father was very complicated. That is why we find Kafka a mysterious and conflicted person. And there is also some glimpse we found um, in his personality of inferiority complex person. And so the neurotic relationship with his tyrannical father influenced his mental condition, and he suffered from clinical depression and social anxiety. That is why he became engaged to several women but married none. And finally, at the age of 40, he died because of a very deadlier disease, tuberculosis. In this slide, I'm going to discuss the work and style of Franz Kafka. Before, we have discussed his personal life, his biography, and now in this slide, I am going to discuss his work and style. Franz Kafka, a novelist and a short story writer of 20th century literature, is the major figure, a very famous figure, a significant figure of 20th century literature. As far as his style is concerned, it is commonly said that style is the dress of thought. And if we analyze the thoughts, the conflicts, or the personality of Kafka, we can very well understand his style. That he's not a systematic philosopher or a religious man, because of his various levels of meaning, because of his deep philosophy and the bizarre philosophy, and basically the reason that his work fuses the elements of realism and fantastic. Students, basically, literary realism is a part of realist art movement, beginning with mid 19th century in French literature and as well as in Russian literature, and it extending to be late 19th and early 20th century. Literary realism attempts to represent a familiar thing as they are, and a realist author close to depict everyday and banal activities and experiences instead of using romanticized or similarly stylized presentation. And as far as fantastic is concerned, fantastic, the word fantastic, Fantastique, it is the French word fantastic, and it is characterized by ambiguous presentation of seemingly supernatural forces. And supernatural forces means that anything that fall outside from the limitation of scientific understanding. So, the deep philosophy of Franz Kafka, his deep philosophy and the mystery that features through his isolated protagonist facing that bizarre or surrealistic predicaments and incomprehensive socio-bureaucratic powers. And it is that socio-bureaucratic powers refers to the non-elected government officials and an administrative policy of making any group uh, and the same situation, the same bizarre condition, and the same surrealistic predicaments have been discussed in his work, The Metamorphosis, The Trial, The Castle, and many of his short stories. When we talk about the style of Franz Kafka, then the term which came into our mind that is very famous is Kafkaesque. That term is used to represent and it is usually associated with the work of Kafka that used to represent a particular characteristic or a reminiscent of the oppressive or nightmarish qualities of Franz Kafka's fictional world. And his deep philosophy and mystery that features Kafka as an isolated person, as a conflicted person, as if he's an outsider, and he presented his conflict and his conflict are based on his own experience that he had to work in a meaningless bureaucratic job. And at this there is also another reason that is that he became frustrated at having to support his family. So, same is the case with his protagonist, who represent his isolation, his alienation, and they are facing a bizarre and surrealistic predicament, and the situation is very incomprehensible, and the socio-bureaucratic powers overwhelmed the life of his protagonist. And the term Kafkaesque has entered in the English language to describe the situation like those uh, as he found in his work. And Kafka is himself is very isolated person, very alienated person, and he reflected through his word that how he perceived human beings as they are trapped by their authority, and the world is very hopeless, and the situation is very absurd, and the condition is totally helpless. Students, this slide is the continuation um, of the previous slide, and in this slide again I'm going to discuss the term that is associated with the work of Kafka. The term is Kafkaesque, and here I want to tell you what is the theory behind this term Kafkaesque. There is an author who wrote the exhaustive critical biography of Franz Kafka named Friedrich R. Karl, and his interview was published in the New York Times. And the interesting thing that he used to say is that the word Kafkaesque is misused. And according to him, he says that what's Kafkaesque is when you enter a surreal world in which all your control patterns, all your plans, the whole way in which you begins to fall pieces, when you find yourself against a force that does not lend itself to the way you perceive the world. So he says that you don't give up, you don't lie down and die. What you do is struggle against this with all your equipment, with whatever you have. But of course, you don't stand a chance. That is Kafkaesque. according to Friedrich R. Core. So it is very interesting aspect of Kafkaesque that if uh, if I'll discuss, I'll see the comparison, but we perceive that Kafkaesque is a bizarre situation, a helpless situation. But here, Friedrich R. Karl says that it is a situation where we used to struggle against what the forces are. Our struggle and our trying is basically Kafkaesque. So class, let's discuss Metamorphosis. And here is a brief introduction of this novel. That author is Franz Kafka, and it is written in 1912 and published in 1915. The language of this novel is German, and it is later translated into English in 1936. And I have added a review of Dawn.com about this novel, that despite all the absurdities in the Metamorphosis, the novella remains one of Kafka's most well known work. The combination of the absurd and symbolic is actually what makes the novella so complex and an interesting read. However, it is not everyone's favorite, and that again can be explained by the same. Not everyone likes to read books like The Metamorphosis. Nevertheless, it is still worth a head. You never know when you might begin to enjoy a strange book. So I find that review interesting to add in my slide. In this slide, I'm going to discuss the story outline of Metamorphosis. That this novel starts with a line that one morning, when Gregor Samsa woke up from troubled dream, he found himself transformed in his bed into a horrible vermin. So we see that Gregor Samsa is a young but lonely, a traveling salesman who finds himself transformed into a giant bug. The Samsas are of a family of four that include his parents and his sister Greet. So Gregor is the person who is responsible for supporting his family, and we know through the novel that his father had stopped working many years ago due to the failure of the business. So, after transformation, Gregor is met with horror and disgust when he reveals his new form to his family and his supervisor. And the firm considered the employees, like Gregor used to work in that firm. That firm considered them as scoundrels, and they distrust them. So neither from his supervisor nor from his family he get any support. Initially, his sister is the one who cares for Gregor, but at the end she cries that we must try to get rid of it. And this is another heartbreak for Gregor when his sister turns hostile to him. So we see that there are two metamorphoses in this novella, that Gregor from human to woman, the transformation of a Gregor from human to woman, and the Samsa family, the family of Gregor, who also turns like a parasitic family, sucking the blood of their own son. So the tragedy of death of Gregor when he dies um, as a loathsome insect, and his family doesn't care of him. And in the end, when they relieved from Gregor's death, the family takes the day off and goes out for a trip for a country to the country. In this slide, I want to discuss another aspect, that is psychological depression. That when we understand the term Kafkaesque, so we used to analyze that uh, the term also reflect the psychological depression, the surreal condition, and the nightmarish situation which evokes feelings of futility, feelings of confusion and helplessness, and it is about the stifling nature of bureaucracies um, and that psychological depression reveals the actual condition of humanity. So, the illness that can challenge the ability to perform even routine daily activities, and the behavior of Gregor is parallel to all these psychological depressed conditions or the conflicts, like the loss of interest or the pleasure, and it sustained fatigue without physical exertion, and lack of energy and motivation, and feelings of guilt or hopelessness, and self-centeredness. So there is a discussion on all these aspects which reflect the psychological depressed condition of 20th century people. These are some of the major themes of Metamorphosis, like the absurdity of life, alienation, the disconnect between mind and body, existential anxiety and the limits of sympathy. And last theme of this novella is guilt. You can explore more themes by yourself. Students, after this detailed discussion on German literature, the aspect of German philosophy, and on the theory of Franz Kafka, and after that, the discussion on metamorphosis, are you be able to do that self work to analyze the different aspect of this novel, the modern fiction, the magical realism, the fantastic happening, and the realistic setting. I have discussed two, three aspects in this lecture. So I'm giving you a self assignment to explore these aspects and to understand all these theories regarding this novel.